Step out of the vehicle now. The command cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Officer Todd Brennan's hand rested on his service weapon, his stance aggressive, confrontational. His partner, Officer Kevin Walsh, stood 3 feet behind, radio already in hand. James Harrison looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. He was sitting on a bench in Franklin Park, a public space in downtown Richmond, Virginia. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pavement. Around him, dozens of people were enjoying the mild October weather. Families with children, joggers, students studying on the grass. "Sir, I'm not in a vehicle," James said calmly. "I'm sitting on a bench." Brennan's face reddened. "Don't get smart with me. Let me see your ID. Now." James wore a simple navy blue polo shirt, khaki pants, and comfortable walking shoes. Nothing about his appearance suggested authority or wealth. To Officer Brennan, he was just another black man who needed to be controlled. "May I ask what this is regarding?" James asked, his tone measured and respectful. "You're regarding whatever I say you're regarding. ID, now." A woman walking her dog slowed down, sensing the tension. A teenager on a nearby bench pulled out his phone. The camera started recording. "Sir, I haven't committed any crime. I'm sitting in a public park." James remained seated, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. Brennan stepped closer. "That's it. You're under arrest for obstruction." "Officer," James said carefully, "I'm happy to show you identification, but I'd like to understand what law I've broken." The question was reasonable. The tone was calm. But to Brennan, it was defiance. "Stand up, turn around, hands behind your back." James didn't move immediately. He was calculating, thinking through the situation. He'd been in scenarios like this before, not as governor, but as a black man in America. The calculus was always the same: comply or resist, dignity or safety. Sometimes you couldn't have both. "Officer Brennan, I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket," James said clearly for everyone to hear. "I'm moving slowly. I'm showing you my identification voluntarily." His hand moved with deliberate precision, no sudden movements, no aggressive gestures, everything visible, everything clear. Brennan grabbed his arm. "That's it, you're done." The teenager's video was already uploading to social media. A woman in a business suit had stopped to watch, her expression troubled. An elderly man shook his head and kept walking, unwilling to get involved. "Officer, you're making a mistake," James said as Brennan wrenched his arm behind his back. "The only mistake here is your attitude." Brennan snapped the first handcuff on, the metal biting into James's wrist. Walsh finally spoke up. "Todd, maybe we should just check his ID first." "Stay out of this, Kevin." Brennan snapped the second handcuff. James's wallet had fallen to the ground when Brennan grabbed him. It lay open on the pavement, a Virginia driver's license visible. The teenager filming zoomed in on it, capturing the name clearly. The woman with the dog approached cautiously. "Officers, excuse me, but this seems excessive. He was just sitting here." "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested for interference," Brennan barked. She stepped back but kept watching, her phone now out and recording as well. James remained calm, his breathing steady. "Officer Brennan, I'm going to give you one opportunity to check my identification before this situation escalates beyond your control." "Is that a threat?" Brennan shoved James forward toward the patrol car parked at the curb. "It's a fact." The gathering crowd had grown to about 15 people. More phones were out. The teenager's live stream had 40 viewers and climbing. Someone in the comments had recognized the license in the video. "Wait, is that Governor Harrison?" The comment appeared in real time. "No way, why would the governor be in a park?" "That's definitely him. I've seen him at press conferences." Brennan opened the back door of the patrol car and pushed James toward it. "Watch your head," he said without sincerity. James ducked, folding himself into the back seat. The handcuffs dug into his wrists. Through the window, he could see the crowd growing larger. The woman in the business suit was on her phone, speaking urgently to someone. Walsh picked up James's wallet from the ground. "Todd, you need to see this." "Not now, we're taking him in." "Todd," Walsh's voice carried an edge of panic. "Look at the ID." Brennan glanced over impatiently. Walsh held up the driver's license, his face pale. "James Harrison, date of birth matching a man in his early 50s. And at the bottom of the license, printed in small letters but clearly visible, Virginia State Government Vehicle Authorization. That doesn't mean anything, Brennan said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Todd, look at the name, Walsh insisted. Lots of people have that name. The woman in the business suit approached again, her phone still at her ear. Officers, I'm with the governor's security detail. That man you just arrested is Governor James Harrison. Brennan's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Disbelief, confusion, realization, horror. That's impossible. He was just sitting there, like a regular person. He often does that, the woman replied, her tone professional but cold. He believes in being accessible to citizens. Her name was Natasha Coleman, the governor's press secretary, though Brennan didn't know that yet. Governor Harrison dismissed his security detail an hour ago so he could have some private time in the park. Walsh had gone completely pale. Oh God, oh my God. The teenager's live stream now had 300 viewers. The comments section was exploding. That cop just arrested the governor. This is about to be a national news story. Career over, done, finished. Brennan stood frozen, his hand still on the patrol car door. Inside, James sat calmly, his expression unchanged. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smirking. He was simply waiting. I need to see additional identification, Brennan said, trying to salvage something from the situation. Natasha stepped forward. Officer, I'm going to walk to that vehicle, retrieve the governor's credentials from his briefcase, and return. She pointed to a black SUV parked 50 yards away. Is that acceptable? Brennan nodded, unable to speak. The park had transformed. What had been a peaceful afternoon scene was now a circus. 30 people had gathered. Multiple live streams were broadcasting. Someone had called a news station. A van with Channel 7 News painted on the side pulled up to the curb. Walsh leaned close to Brennan. We need to call Lieutenant Foster, now. Brennan fumbled for his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need Lieutenant Foster to respond to Franklin Park immediately. Priority call. Copy that, Unit 23. What's the nature of the emergency? Just send her now. Natasha returned with a leather folder. Inside was a Virginia State identification card with an official seal, a letter on governor's letterhead confirming James Harrison's identity, and a photograph of him standing with the President of the United States at a White House event. She held them up for Brennan to see, making sure the teenager's camera captured everything. Officer Todd Brennan, you have falsely arrested Governor James Harrison of the Commonwealth of Virginia. She said it clearly for the record, for the cameras, for the dozens of witnesses. I strongly suggest you release him immediately and contact your supervisor. Brennan's hands were shaking as he opened the patrol car door. Governor Harrison, sir, there's been a misunderstanding. James remained seated. Officer Brennan, you arrested me for obstruction. You refused to examine my identification. You used physical force despite my complete compliance. Where exactly is the misunderstanding? Sir, I didn't realize who you were. And if I wasn't the governor, if I was just a regular citizen, would that justify your actions? The question hung in the air. The cameras captured every word. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something significant. I was doing my job, Brennan said weakly. Your job is to serve and protect, James replied, not to harass citizens sitting peacefully in a public park. Now, are you going to remove these handcuffs? Brennan's hands fumbled with the key. The handcuffs clicked open. James rubbed his wrists where the metal had left red marks. Lieutenant Rebecca Foster arrived in an unmarked vehicle, her expression thunderous. She'd been briefed by dispatch. She knew exactly what had happened, and she knew her officers had just created a catastrophe. Governor Harrison. She extended her hand, which James shook. Lieutenant Rebecca Foster, District Supervisor. On behalf of the Richmond Police Department, I apologize for this incident. James stood slowly, straightening his shirt. Lieutenant Foster, your apology is noted. However, apologies don't address systemic problems. The crowd had swelled to over 50 people now. The Channel 7 News reporter Jasmine Reed was setting up for a live broadcast. Her cameraman was filming everything. "Governor Harrison, what happened here today?" Jasmine asked, microphone extended. James looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the officers standing awkwardly nearby. "What happened is what happens to thousands of black men every day in America. I was sitting in a park. I was threatened, grabbed, and arrested without cause. The only difference is that I have a platform to address it." The teenager's live stream had hit 2,000 viewers. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them. "This is going viral. Every news outlet in the country is going to cover this. That cop's career is over." Foster tried to take control of the situation. "Governor, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Lieutenant, the time for private discussions is over," James replied. "This incident was public. The response will be public." Walsh had backed away from Brennan, distancing himself physically and symbolically. He'd known this was wrong from the start. He'd tried to stop it. That might save his career. Might. Brennan stood alone, isolated, the weight of his actions crushing down on him. The crowd wasn't sympathetic. Several people were shouting, "Racist cop. Sue him. He should be fired." James held up his hand, and surprisingly, the crowd quieted. Anger is understandable, but it's not constructive. What we need is accountability. What we need is change. Natasha appeared at his side with a tablet. "Governor, your office has been contacted by the mayor, the police commissioner, the attorney general, and the lieutenant governor. They're all requesting immediate calls." "Tell them I'll address this publicly first," James said. "Then we'll have private conversations." Jasmine Reed positioned herself for the interview. "Governor Harrison, you've been vocal about police reform throughout your administration. Does today's incident change your perspective?" James looked directly into the camera. "It doesn't change my perspective. It confirms it. Police officers have tremendous power. When that power is wielded without accountability, without proper training, without respect for civil rights, this is what happens." The live broadcast was being picked up by affiliates across the state. Within minutes, it would be national news. Officer Brennan approached hesitantly. "Governor, I want to apologize." James turned to face him. "Officer Brennan, your apology means nothing without understanding. Why did you stop me?" Brennan struggled for words. There was a report of suspicious activity in the park." "What was suspicious?" James pressed. "What specifically made you target me?" "You were just sitting there," Brennan admitted. "And that's suspicious behavior? Sitting on a bench in a public park?" "I thought you might be casing the area." "Casing the area for what?" James's tone remained calm, but the questions were relentless. "What crime did you think I was preparing to commit?" The silence was damning. Everyone watching knew the answer. Everyone understood what had really happened. Lieutenant Foster intervened. "Governor, Officer Brennan will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." "That's a start," James replied, "but it's not enough." The crowd murmured agreement. Phones kept recording. The story kept spreading. A man pushed through the crowd, his expression angry. Terrence Adams, a community organizer who'd worked on James's gubernatorial campaign. "Governor, this is exactly what we've been talking about. This is why black communities don't trust the police." James nodded. "Terrence, you're absolutely right, which is why this incident can't be treated as an isolated event. It's symptomatic of larger problems." Jasmine Reed jumped in with another question. "Governor, will you be pressing charges against Officer Brennan?" "I'll be reviewing all my legal options," James replied. "But more importantly, I'll be using my authority as governor to mandate immediate reforms." The Channel 7 van was joined by vehicles from 3 other news stations. The park had become a media circus. Reporters were interviewing witnesses. Cameras were capturing every angle. The teenager who'd filmed everything from the start approached nervously. "Governor Harrison, sir, I recorded the whole thing. Do you want me to send you the video?" James smiled at him. "What's your name, son?" "Tyrone Davis, sir." "Tyrone, that video is evidence. Keep it safe. Share it publicly if you want. The truth needs to be seen." Tyrone nodded, overwhelmed by the attention he was suddenly receiving. His live stream had 4,000 viewers now. His follower count was skyrocketing. Walsh approached Foster separately. "Lieutenant, I tried to stop this. I told Brennan to check the ID first." Foster's expression was grim. "You'll need to document everything in your report, Walsh. Every detail, every warning you gave." "Yes, ma'am." The woman in the business suit who'd first recognized James stepped forward. "Governor, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Morgan. I teach constitutional law at University of Richmond. What I witnessed today was a clear violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. I'd be happy to provide testimony." James shook her hand. "Dr. Morgan, I appreciate that. My office will be in contact." The crowd continued to grow. People were arriving because they'd seen the live streams, the news alerts, the social media posts. Franklin Park had become the center of a national conversation about race, policing, and power. Natasha pulled James aside. "Governor, we need to get you back to the Capitol. Security is insisting." "Not yet," James replied. "First, I want to speak to every person who witnessed this. I want their stories, their perspectives." "Sir, that could take hours." "Then it takes hours." Lieutenant Foster was on her phone, her expression increasingly stressed. She was receiving instructions from people far above her pay grade. The police commissioner, the mayor, probably the attorney general. Everyone wanted to contain this situation before it exploded completely. But it was already too late. The explosion had happened. The fallout was just beginning. Officer Brennan sat in his patrol car, his head in his hands. Walsh stood outside, keeping distance. Their partnership, whatever it had been, was over. Walsh had made his choice. He'd tried to stop this. That was his defense, his shield against the consequences about to rain down. Brennan had no such shield. He'd made his choice too, and now he would face the consequences. James moved through the crowd, shaking hands, listening to stories. An elderly black woman told him about her grandson being stopped 7 times in 1 year. A young father described being pulled over for driving in a nice neighborhood. A college student talked about being followed by security in department stores. These were the real stories, the ones that happened every day when cameras weren't rolling, when governors weren't involved, when the victims didn't have power or platforms. Jasmine Reed captured all of it on camera. This wasn't just a news story anymore. It was documentation, evidence of systemic problems that required systematic solutions. As the sun began to set over Franklin Park, the crowd had grown to nearly 200 people. What had started as a simple arrest had become a community gathering, a moment of unity, a collective acknowledgement that something fundamental needed to change. James stood on a park bench so everyone could see him. The cameras focused. The crowd quieted. "Today I was treated the way too many citizens are treated every day. I was judged by my appearance. I was presumed guilty without evidence. I was subjected to force without cause. The only difference between me and thousands of others is that I have the power to demand change." The crowd erupted in applause. "And I will use that power," James continued, "not just for myself, but for every person who's ever been profiled, harassed, or abused by those who are supposed to protect them." More applause. Someone started chanting, "Justice now! Justice now!" The chant spread through the crowd. James raised his hand for quiet. Justice requires more than chants. It requires action. Starting tomorrow, I will be introducing emergency legislation to reform police practices across Virginia. Body cameras will be mandatory. Bias training will be comprehensive. Accountability will be real. The teenager Tyrone was capturing everything. His live stream had peaked at 8,000 viewers. His video would eventually be seen by millions. Lieutenant Foster approached once more. "Governor, I need to take Officer Brennan to the station for official reporting." James nodded. "Lieutenant, I expect a full investigation, complete transparency, no cover-ups, no excuses." "You have my word, sir." "Your word isn't enough. I want independent oversight. I want civilian review. I want real accountability." Foster swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." As Brennan was led to Foster's vehicle, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, some jeered, some simply watched in silence, understanding that this was a moment that would be remembered. James descended from the bench and allowed Natasha to finally guide him toward the waiting SUV. Security personnel had arrived, forming a protective perimeter. The Secret Service detail that he'd dismissed earlier had returned, looking distinctly unhappy about the situation. "Governor, you can't just dismiss us like that," the lead agent said. "Agent Morrison, I'm the governor, not a prisoner. I can absolutely dismiss you when I want private time." "Sir, with respect, look at what happened when we weren't here." James stopped and looked at him directly. "What happened is that I experienced what millions of Americans experience. What happened is that I gained first-hand evidence of problems I've been trying to fix. What happened is necessary." Morrison had no response to that. As James finally departed Franklin Park, the crowd remained. People were sharing their own stories. Reporters were conducting interviews. Tyrone was being treated like a celebrity, his video already viral. The Richmond Police Department headquarters building stood 7 stories tall in downtown Richmond, its gray concrete facade reflecting the last rays of evening sun. Inside, chaos had replaced the normal end-of-shift routine. Chief Daniel Kovac stood in his 5th-floor office, watching multiple news channels simultaneously. Each showed the same footage: Governor James Harrison in handcuffs, Officer Todd Brennan's aggressive stance, the crowd's reaction, the aftermath. His phone hadn't stopped ringing for 90 minutes. Kovac was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement. He'd worked his way up from patrol officer to chief through competence, political savvy, and careful navigation of department politics. He'd survived 4 mayors, 2 police commissioners, and countless controversies. This was different. "Get me Foster, Brennan, and Walsh," he barked at his assistant. "Conference room, now." Lieutenant Rebecca Foster arrived first, her uniform still crisp despite the afternoon's chaos. She carried a folder thick with preliminary reports. "Chief, I've already initiated the internal investigation. Brennan's on administrative leave. Walsh is cooperating fully with the inquiry." Kovac didn't look at her. His eyes remained on the television screens. "Tell me how this happened, Rebecca. Tell me how one of my officers arrested the governor of Virginia." Foster sat down heavily. "Brennan received a call about suspicious activity in Franklin Park. He responded, saw Governor Harrison sitting on a bench, and made assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" "The kind we've been training against for 5 years. The kind that get departments sued and officers fired." Kovac finally turned from the screens. "Is there any possible justification? Anything we can use to defend this?" Foster shook her head. "I've reviewed Tyrone Davis's video 3 times. The governor was completely compliant. He offered to show identification. Brennan refused to look at it properly. There's no defense here, Chief. This was profiling, pure and simple." Officer Todd Brennan entered the conference room, still in uniform, but with his duty belt removed. His face was ashen, his movements mechanical. Officer Kevin Walsh followed, maintaining physical distance from his former partner. "Sit," Kovac commanded. They sat. "Brennan, tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." Brennan's voice was hollow. "We received a call from dispatch. Suspicious person in Franklin Park. Description was vague. Black male, casual clothing, sitting on a bench for an extended period." "That's it? That's the entire description?" "Yes, sir. And based on that description, you arrested the governor." "I didn't know he was the governor." Kovac's voice rose. "You didn't know because you didn't check. You didn't look at his identification properly. You didn't verify anything. You just assumed." Brennan had no response. Walsh spoke up. "Chief, I advised Brennan to check the ID. I told him we should verify before taking action. He ignored me." Kovac looked at Walsh. "Your statement will be noted in your personnel file as a mitigating factor. You're suspended pending investigation, but I don't expect you'll face termination." Walsh nodded, relief visible on his face. Brennan, however, Kovac turned his full attention to the officer who'd created this disaster. "You've been with this department for 12 years. You've had 3 prior complaints of racial profiling. All were investigated. All resulted in mandatory additional training. Clearly the training didn't take." "Sir, I was just doing my job." "Your job is to serve and protect all citizens equally. Your job is not to harass people for sitting in parks. Your job is not to arrest governors because they don't look like you think they should. The television screen showed Governor Harrison's press conference from an hour ago. Kovac turned up the volume. James stood behind a podium in the governor's mansion, Natasha Coleman beside him. His wrists still showed red marks from the handcuffs. "Today's incident was not about me personally," James said to the assembled reporters. "It was about a system that allows officers to make assumptions based on race rather than behavior. It was about a culture that treats black citizens as suspicious by default." A reporter shouted a question. "Governor, are you calling for Officer Brennan's termination?" "I'm calling for accountability," James replied. "Officer Brennan violated my civil rights. He used his authority to harass a citizen who had committed no crime. The consequences should be proportional to those actions." Another reporter. "What specific reforms are you proposing?" James pulled out a document. "Tomorrow morning I will introduce the Law Enforcement Accountability Act. It includes mandatory body cameras for all officers, with cameras required to be active during all civilian interactions. It includes quarterly bias training reviewed by independent civil rights organizations. It includes civilian oversight boards with real authority to investigate complaints." Kovac muted the television. "You see that? That's the governor of Virginia on national television using your actions as justification for sweeping police reform legislation." Brennan's head dropped. "I'm sorry, Chief. Sorry doesn't fix this." Kovac turned to Foster. "Rebecca, what's the legal exposure here?" Foster consulted her folder. "The governor has grounds for civil rights violations, false arrest, assault, and possibly battery depending on how aggressive we classify the handcuffing. He could sue Brennan personally and the department institutionally. Given his platform and resources, he could win easily. Estimated damages? Tens of millions if he pursues it aggressively, plus the publicity damage, plus the federal investigations that will inevitably follow." Kovac's phone rang again. He glanced at the caller ID and grimaced. "It's the commissioner. Everyone out except Foster." Brennan and Walsh fled the conference room. Kovac answered the call on speaker. Commissioner Helen Stewart's voice filled the room. "Chief Kovac, please tell me you have good news." "Commissioner, I have a complete disaster and no way to minimize it. I just spent 45 minutes on the phone with the mayor, the attorney general, and the governor's chief of staff. The consensus is that this department has embarrassed the entire city." Kovac rubbed his temples. "Commissioner, Officer Brennan will be terminated. We'll cooperate fully with any investigation. We'll implement whatever reforms are required. That's not enough." Stewart's voice was cold. "The governor wants systemic changes. The mayor wants to avoid a federal investigation. I want to keep my job, which means we need to get ahead of this immediately." "What do you suggest?" "Full transparency," Stewart said. "Release all internal documents related to Brennan's prior complaints. Invite federal oversight. Announce reforms before the governor forces them on us. Show that we're capable of self-correction." Foster leaned toward the phone. "Commissioner, with respect, full transparency will expose problems beyond just this incident. We have dozens of complaint files that could be problematic under scrutiny. Then we fix those problems too," Stewart replied. "The alternative is having the federal government impose changes we can't control. This is our chance to manage the narrative." Kovac looked at Foster, who nodded reluctantly. "Commissioner, we'll prepare a complete reform package by tomorrow morning. Body cameras, training overhaul, civilian oversight, everything the governor wants." "Make it happen." Stewart ended the call abruptly. Foster gathered her documents. "Chief, implementing all of this in the time frame they want, it's going to cost millions. The budget doesn't support it." "Then we'll find the money," Kovac replied. "Cut from somewhere else, delay equipment purchases, freeze hiring, whatever it takes. The police union is going to fight the body camera requirement." "Let them." Kovac's tone was final. "They can fight a requirement that protects good officers and exposes bad ones. See how that plays politically." Foster left to begin the massive task of reorganizing department policies. Kovac remained alone in his office, watching the news coverage continue. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained a link to Tyrone Davis's viral video and a message. This is what accountability looks like. Time to change or resign. Kovac didn't know who sent it. It could have been anyone. Thousands of people were watching this unfold. Everyone had an opinion. Down the hall, Officer Todd Brennan sat in an empty break room, his career collapsing around him. His phone had 63 missed calls. His personal social media accounts had been identified. The harassment had already started. "Racist cop, you're finished. I hope you lose everything." Some messages were worse, much worse. Threats of violence, promises of retribution. The internet mob had found its target. Walsh entered the break room cautiously. "Todd, you should go home. There's nothing you can do here." Brennan looked up, his eyes red. "Kevin, I swear I didn't know. I just thought he was suspicious." "Why?" Walsh asked. "Why did you think he was suspicious? What was he doing that made you target him?" Brennan couldn't answer. There was no good answer. The truth was too ugly to say out loud. He was black. That's why I stopped him. The admission came out as a whisper. Walsh sat down across from him. "Todd, we've been partners for 3 years. I've watched you make assumptions before. I've tried to correct you, but you never listened. I never thought it was that bad. You arrested the governor of Virginia because of his skin color." Walsh's voice was gentle but firm. "How is that not bad?" Brennan's phone rang. His wife. He let it go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her yet. Couldn't explain how he'd destroyed his career, endangered their family's financial security, and become a national symbol of police racism all in one afternoon. At the governor's mansion, James sat in his private study reviewing preliminary reports from his staff. Isaiah Parker, his chief of staff, had compiled a comprehensive analysis of police reform efforts across the country. "Governor, the political capital required to push through comprehensive reform is substantial," Isaiah said, scrolling through his tablet. "You'll need support from the legislature, cooperation from police unions, and buy-in from local law enforcement agencies across Virginia." James looked up from the report. "Isaiah, I have something better than political capital. I have a national news story showing exactly why reform is necessary." The phone rang. James answered on speaker. "Governor Harrison." "Governor, this is Attorney General Candace Wright. I've reviewed the preliminary reports from today's incident. You have clear legal grounds for action against Officer Brennan and potentially the Richmond Police Department." "Candace, I'm not interested in a settlement check. I'm interested in changing the system." "I understand," Wright replied, "but a lawsuit provides leverage. The threat of significant financial judgment motivates change faster than legislation alone." James considered this. "You're suggesting I pursue both tracks simultaneously." "Exactly. File a civil rights lawsuit against Brennan and the department. Use the discovery process to expose systematic problems. Meanwhile, push the legislation through the assembly. The combination creates pressure from multiple directions." "It's aggressive. You were handcuffed and arrested without cause while sitting peacefully in a public park." Wright's voice was firm. "Aggressive is appropriate." After the call ended, James stood and walked to the window overlooking the mansion grounds. The evening news vans were still camped outside the gates. Reporters were doing live shots with the mansion as backdrop. Natasha entered with an updated media schedule. "Governor, you have interview requests from every major news network. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, CBS, ABC, NBC. Everyone wants the story." "Schedule them all," James said. "Every interview, every opportunity to explain what happened and why it matters." "Sir, that's at least 20 hours of media appearances over the next week." "Then it's 20 hours well spent." Isaiah returned with preliminary vote counts from the Virginia General Assembly. "Governor, your law enforcement reform bill has strong support among Democrats but significant opposition from Republicans. It's going to be a fight." James smiled grimly. "Good. Let them explain why they oppose accountability. Let them defend racial profiling on the record." The political calculus was clear. James had been elected with 52% of the vote. His approval ratings were currently at 56%. This incident had the potential to boost those numbers significantly among black voters and progressive whites who cared about civil rights. But it could also galvanize opposition, conservative voters who supported police regardless of circumstances, suburban whites who feared crime more than they cared about equality, rural communities where the police could do no wrong. The next election was 2 years away, plenty of time for this incident to be forgotten, or for it to define his entire governorship. James pulled out his personal phone and scrolled through social media. The hashtag Justice for Governor Harrison was trending, but so was Back the Blue and Support Our Police. The country was divided, reacting to the same incident through completely different interpretive lenses. A text message appeared from his daughter, who was finishing her law degree at Howard University. "Dad, I saw what happened. Are you okay?" He replied. "I'm fine, sweetheart. This is exactly why I ran for office." Her response was immediate. "Proud of you. Use this moment. Change the system." James smiled. That was the plan. Use this moment of maximum attention to force changes that had been needed for decades. His phone rang again. Mayor Richard Palmer. "Governor, I want to apologize personally for what happened today." Mayor Palmer's voice was strained. "The Richmond Police Department does not represent the values of this city." "Richard, apologies are necessary but insufficient. What I need is action." "You'll have it," Palmer replied. "Chief Kovac has my full support to implement whatever reforms are required. The City Council will approve emergency funding if needed." "I appreciate that," James said, "but I'm not leaving this to local initiative. The state will be imposing minimum standards for all law enforcement agencies." Palmer was silent for a moment. "Governor, that's going to create tension with police departments across Virginia." "Good. Tension means change is happening. Comfort means nothing's changing." After the call ended, Isaiah spoke up. "Governor, you're making powerful enemies. Police unions have significant political influence." "Isaiah, I was arrested for sitting in a park," James replied calmly. "Anyone who opposes reforms after that is telling every black person in Virginia that their rights don't matter. Let them make that argument publicly." The strategy was risky but sound. Use the incident as a catalyst for changes that would have been impossible without it. Turn a personal indignity into a public good. Natasha returned with more news. "Governor, Tyrone Davis's video has been viewed 7 million times. It's the most viral video in Virginia politics history." "Set up a meeting with Tyrone," James said. "I want to thank him personally. That young man documented something important." The evening deepened into night. James remained in his study, reading reports, taking calls, planning strategy. Sleep could wait. This moment was too important to waste on rest. Across town, Officer Todd Brennan sat in his darkened living room, his career over, his reputation destroyed, his future uncertain. He'd made a choice in Franklin Park, a choice based on assumptions, prejudice, and laziness. Now he would live with the consequences. The system that had protected him for 12 years, the culture that had enabled his behavior, the union that had shielded him from accountability, all of it was about to change. Because he'd arrested the wrong person. Not because what he did was wrong, in the cosmic sense. It had always been wrong. But because he'd done it to someone with the power to fight back. That was the real lesson. The real story. Justice wasn't blind. It was selective. Available to those with resources, platforms, and power. James Harrison had all three, and he was about to use them to change a system that had failed too many people for too long. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The Virginia State Capitol building rose against the morning sky, its white dome gleaming in the October sunlight. Built in 1788, it had witnessed countless moments of history. Today would add another chapter. James Harrison arrived at 7 in the morning, earlier than usual. Isaiah Parker walked beside him, carrying briefing documents and a tablet loaded with the latest polling data. "Governor, overnight polling shows 63% of Virginians support your reform proposals," Isaiah reported as they entered through the private entrance. "Among black voters, it's 91%. Even among white Republicans, You have 38% support. James nodded, absorbing the numbers. That 38% is higher than I expected. The video helped. Isaiah pulled up social media analytics on his tablet. Tyrone Davis's footage has been shared 42 million times across all platforms. The image of you in handcuffs is everywhere. It's impossible to defend what happened. They entered the governor's office suite. Natasha Coleman was already there, coordinating with the communications team. 3 television screens showed morning news programs, all covering the incident. "Governor, good morning." Natasha looked up from her laptop. "We have confirmation from all major networks for interviews. CNN at 9, MSNBC at 10:30, CBS at noon. Fox News requested afternoon availability." "Schedule Fox for 3, James said, hanging his jacket on the antique coat rack. "I want to speak directly to their audience. They need to hear this from me, not filtered through their usual commentary." Natasha made notes. The Richmond Times-Dispatch is requesting an exclusive sit-down interview for their Sunday edition. Granted, full hour, no topic restrictions. James sat behind his desk, reviewing the stack of documents Isaiah had placed there. "What's the legislative schedule looking like?" Isaiah consulted his tablet. "The House convenes at 10. Your reform bill is being fast-tracked through the Judiciary Committee. We have commitments from 63 delegates, which gives us a working majority assuming everyone votes as promised." "Assumptions are dangerous in politics," James replied. "What's the opposition planning?" "They're trying to frame it as anti-police legislation. Delegate Harrison, not related to you thankfully, is organizing resistance. He's arguing that body cameras are too expensive and bias training is political correctness run amok." "Let him argue." James leaned back in his chair. "Every word he says defending the current system will be played next to the video of me being arrested. The optics aren't in his favor." A knock at the door. Attorney General Candace Wright entered, carrying a leather folio thick with legal documents. "Governor, I've prepared the civil complaint against Officer Brennan and the Richmond Police Department." Candace laid the documents on James's desk. "It's comprehensive. Civil rights violations, false arrest, assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." James scanned the first few pages. "Damages requested. We're asking for $50 million in compensatory damages and $100 million in punitive damages." Candace pointed to specific sections. "The punitive amount is designed to send a message. The city's insurance will cover most of it, but the deductible alone will impact their budget significantly." "And Officer Brennan personally?" "He's named individually. He'll need his own legal representation. His homeowner's insurance might cover some of it, but he's looking at potential personal bankruptcy even if we don't collect fully." James considered this. The goal isn't to destroy him financially. The goal is accountability and system change. "I understand," Candace replied. "But the lawsuit creates leverage. The discovery process will expose training records, complaint histories, and internal communications that show whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern." "File it." James signed the authorization. "And make sure a copy goes to every major news outlet simultaneously. I want maximum transparency." After Candace left, Isaiah pulled up additional polling data. "Governor, there's something interesting in the demographic breakdown. Your approval among suburban white women has jumped 12 points since yesterday." James looked at the graphs. "Why suburban white women specifically?" Isaiah shrugged. "My guess? They saw you sitting peacefully in a park and recognized that it could have been their husband, their father, their son if circumstances were different. The arbitrary nature of it resonated. Or they finally saw what Black Americans have been saying for decades," James added. "Sometimes people need to see injustice happen to someone they respect before they believe it exists." The morning continued with a series of meetings. The Legislative Black Caucus came in as a group, offering unanimous support. The Virginia NAACP president arrived with documentation of similar incidents across the state. The ACLU legal director brought case files going back 10 years. Each meeting added more evidence to the foundation James was building. This wasn't just about one arrest. It was about a systematic pattern of discrimination that had been documented, reported, and ignored for too long. At 8:45, the makeup artist arrived to prepare James for the CNN interview. He sat patiently while she worked, reviewing talking points on his tablet. Natasha briefed him on the interviewer. Anderson Cooper. He'll be sympathetic but professional. Expect questions about your emotional state, whether you felt fear, and what specific reforms you're demanding. The interview will be broadcast live? Live at 9, then replayed throughout the day. At exactly 9 o'clock, James appeared on CNN's screen. Anderson Cooper sat across from him via satellite, his expression serious. Governor Harrison, thank you for joining us. Let's start with the obvious question. How are you doing after yesterday's incident? James looked directly into the camera. Anderson, I'm fine physically. Emotionally, I'm angry. But more than that, I'm motivated. What happened to me happens to countless Americans every day. The difference is I have the platform and power to do something about it. Walk us through what happened from your perspective. James recounted the incident clearly, methodically. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. I was sitting on a bench in Franklin Park, checking emails on my phone. Officer Brennan approached aggressively, demanded I leave, and when I asked what law I had violated, he arrested me. At no point did he properly examine my identification. At no point did he explain what suspicious behavior I had exhibited. He made assumptions based on my appearance and treated those assumptions as facts. Cooper leaned forward. Officer Brennan claims he was responding to a call about suspicious activity. Do you know what that call reported? According to the police report, the call described a black male in casual clothing sitting on a bench. That was the entire description. There was no reported crime, no specific threatening behavior, just a person existing in a public space. And that was enough to justify your arrest in Officer Brennan's judgment. Apparently, James's tone was measured but firm, which tells you everything you need to know about the assumptions at work. To Officer Brennan, a black man sitting peacefully in a park was inherently suspicious enough to warrant police intervention. Cooper pulled up Tyrone Davis's video on the screen. Governor, this footage has been viewed over 50 million times now. What goes through your mind when you watch it? James watched the screen showing himself in handcuffs. Honestly, Anderson, I think about all the people this has happened to who don't have video evidence. I think about all the incidents that weren't recorded, weren't reported, weren't believed. I think about how my experience, as traumatic and infuriating as it was, is still privileged compared to many others because I survived it without physical injury, and I have the resources to fight back. You've filed a lawsuit against Officer Brennan and the Richmond Police Department. Some critics say this is vindictive, that you're using your position to punish people who made an honest mistake. James's expression hardened slightly. Anderson, there was nothing honest about Officer Brennan's actions. He violated my civil rights through racial profiling. That's not a mistake. That's discrimination. And the lawsuit isn't about punishment. It's about exposing systematic failures and creating incentives for change. You're also proposing sweeping legislation. Critics call it the most aggressive police reform bill in Virginia history. Good, it should be aggressive. The problem is aggressive. The solution needs to match the scale of the challenge. Cooper asked about specific provisions. James explained each one clearly, connecting them to his personal experience. Body cameras protect everyone, Anderson. They protect citizens from misconduct, and they protect good officers from false accusations. The only people who oppose body cameras are those who want to hide their actions from scrutiny. The interview lasted 23 minutes. By the time it ended, social media was already reacting. Clips were being shared. Quotes were being highlighted. The narrative was being shaped. Natasha met James as he left the studio. Governor, excellent interview. You were clear, forceful, and relatable. The initial social media response is overwhelmingly positive. What about negative responses? The usual suspects, conservative commentators claiming you're anti-police, but they're fighting an uphill battle. The video makes their arguments look absurd. The MSNBC interview at 10:30 covered similar ground but with a different audience. The interviewer, Joy Reid, was more openly supportive. Governor Harrison, you've been an advocate for criminal justice reform throughout your career, but experiencing this firsthand, has it changed your understanding? James nodded. Joy, I thought I understood. I've read the studies. I've listened to constituents. I've reviewed the data. But there's a difference between intellectual understanding and visceral experience. Being handcuffed, being treated as a criminal for doing absolutely nothing wrong, it crystallizes the issue in a way no amount of research can match. Some people are calling this a turning point moment for police reform nationally. Do you see it that way? I see it as an opportunity. Whether it becomes a turning point depends on what we do next. If we have conversations, express sympathy, and then return to business as usual, nothing changes. If we implement real reforms with teeth, create accountability structures with power, and sustain attention beyond this news cycle, then yes, it could be transformative. The interview ended with Reid thanking him for his courage. James accepted the compliment but redirected. The courage belongs to the thousands of people who've experienced worse than I did and continued fighting for justice without recognition or resources. I'm just doing my job. Between interviews, James returned to his office to handle routine gubernatorial business, budget reviews, appointment confirmations, policy briefings. The work of governing continued even as the crisis demanded attention. Isaiah entered with updated legislative counts. Governor, we've picked up 3 more votes in the House. We're now at 66 confirmed supporters. What changed their minds? Isaiah smiled. Their district offices have been flooded with calls supporting reform. Turns out constituents have opinions. Democracy in action, James replied. What about the Senate? More challenging. We need 21 votes. We have 18 confirmed, 2 leaning yes and 1 undecided. Who's undecided? Senator Frank Morrison from rural Southside Virginia. Conservative district, law enforcement family background. He's getting pressure from both sides. Set up a meeting, James said immediately. I want to talk to him personally. The CBS interview at noon brought tougher questions. The interviewer, Norah O'Donnell, played devil's advocate more aggressively. Governor, police officers have one of the most dangerous jobs in America. They make split-second decisions under pressure. Isn't it unfair to judge Officer Brennan's actions with the benefit of hindsight? James leaned forward. Norah, with respect, Officer Brennan wasn't making a split-second decision in a dangerous situation. He approached me while I was sitting peacefully on a bench, checking my phone. He had all the time in the world to verify facts before taking action. This wasn't about officer safety. This was about bias. But police are trained to be suspicious, to look for potential threats. They're also trained to gather evidence before making arrests. They're trained to respect civil rights. Officer Brennan failed both of those fundamental requirements. O'Donnell pressed harder. Some law enforcement groups are saying your lawsuit and legislation are creating a chilling effect. Officers will be afraid to do their jobs. James didn't back down. Officers should be afraid to violate civil rights. They should be afraid to make arrests without probable cause. If that creates a chilling effect on unconstitutional behavior, I consider that a success, not a problem. You don't seem willing to give Officer Brennan any benefit of the doubt. Norah, I gave him every benefit during the incident itself. I was calm. I was respectful. I offered identification. I explained the situation clearly. He rejected all of that and arrested me anyway. At what point does benefit of the doubt become enabling discrimination? The interview was contentious, but James remained composed. Natasha watched from off-camera, taking notes on which arguments landed effectively and which needed refinement. After CBS, James had lunch with Lieutenant Governor Thomas Bradford. They ate in the private dining room adjacent to the governor's office. "James, I want to express my complete support for your reform agenda," Bradford said between bites of his salad. "What happened to you was inexcusable." "I appreciate that, Thomas. What's your read on the political situation?" Bradford considered carefully. "You have momentum right now. The video gives you moral authority that's hard to challenge, but momentum fades. You need to move fast before the opposition regroups. That's the plan. Vote in the House by end of week, Senate the following week. On my desk for signature within 10 days. "Ambitious," Bradford observed. "What if it stalls?" "Then I use executive authority to implement what I can through state police and agencies under my direct control. Then I make reform the centerpiece of every public appearance until the legislature acts." Bradford nodded approvingly. "You're not letting this go." "Thomas, I can't let this go. Every day we delay is another day someone else experiences what I experienced. Probably someone with less power to fight back." After lunch, James prepared for the Fox News interview. This would be the most challenging. The audience was more skeptical. The interviewer, Brett Baier, would ask harder questions from a conservative perspective. Natasha briefed him again. "Brett will likely frame this as political opportunism. He'll suggest you're using the incident to push an anti-police agenda you already supported. Be ready to separate the personal experience from the policy agenda." "The policy agenda comes from the personal experience," James replied. "They're not separate." At 3 o'clock, James appeared on Fox News. Baier opened aggressively. "Governor Harrison, you've been advocating for police reform throughout your governorship. Some people are saying yesterday's incident is being exploited to advance a predetermined political agenda. How do you respond?" James met the challenge directly. "Brett, if you're asking whether I've been concerned about discriminatory policing before yesterday, the answer is yes. I've reviewed data showing racial disparities in traffic stops, arrests, and use of force. But data is abstract. What happened yesterday made it personal. It confirmed what the data has been telling us. The question isn't whether I had concerns before. The question is why everyone doesn't share those concerns after seeing what happened. But you're using your personal incident to justify sweeping changes that affect all law enforcement across Virginia." "I'm using my personal incident as an example of a systematic problem. The Richmond Police Department had received 147 discrimination complaints last year. I'm not an isolated case. I'm just the case that got attention." Baier pulled up statistics. "Crime rates in Richmond have fallen 23% over the past 5 years. Doesn't that suggest the police are doing their jobs effectively?" "Effective policing and constitutional policing aren't mutually exclusive," James replied. "You can reduce crime while respecting civil rights. The two goals should reinforce each other, not conflict. Some police unions are saying your proposals will make officers afraid to engage with suspects, potentially increasing crime." "Brett, officers shouldn't engage with suspects. They should engage with citizens. That mindset that everyone is a potential suspect is precisely the problem. I wasn't a suspect. I was a citizen sitting in a park, but I was treated as a threat by default." The interview continued for 15 minutes. Baier pressed hard, but James held his ground. He acknowledged legitimate police concerns while refusing to retreat from reform demands. When it ended, Isaiah was waiting with his tablet. "Governor, early polling shows the Fox interview performed well even with their audience. 42% of Fox News viewers say they support your reforms after watching." "That's significant," James said. "If we can get 40% of conservative viewers, we can get this passed." The rest of the afternoon was consumed with legislative strategy sessions. James met with committee chairmen, party leaders, and individual delegates whose votes were uncertain. Each meeting followed a similar pattern. James presented the case for reform. He showed the video. He explained how current policies had failed. He asked for support. Most agreed immediately. A few needed convincing. None could defend the status quo after seeing the evidence. Delegate Harris Thompson from Norfolk raised practical concerns. "Governor, I support your goals, but the body camera requirement alone will cost my district's police department $200,000 they don't have in the budget. James had anticipated this. The state will provide grants to cover implementation costs. We're allocating $15 million in emergency funding specifically for compliance support. That helps. Thompson nodded. What about training requirements? My police chief says 8 hours of bias training per officer will require overtime costs. Then we spread it over 3 months instead of doing it all at once, James replied. The important thing is that it happens, not that it happens overnight. By 6 o'clock, James had personally met with 37 legislators. He'd gained commitments from 23. The momentum was building. Natasha appeared with the evening schedule. Governor, you have a 7 o'clock meeting with community leaders, an 8 o'clock call with the NAACP national president, and a 9 o'clock briefing with your legal team on the lawsuit. And somewhere in there I should probably eat dinner, James said with a tired smile. I had food brought to your office, Natasha replied. You can eat during the community leader meeting. The community meeting brought together 15 activists, organizers, and religious leaders from Richmond's black communities. They gathered in the governor's conference room, some sitting, some standing, all passionate. Andre Mitchell, a community organizer who'd worked on James's campaign, spoke first. Governor, our communities have been waiting for this moment for decades. Don't let it slip away. James nodded. Andre, I hear you. What specific concerns do you have? Mitchell leaned forward. Our concern is that reforms get watered down in committee. Body cameras with loopholes about when they need to be activated. Bias training that's just check-the-box compliance. Civilian oversight boards without real power. The concerns were valid. James had seen it happen in other jurisdictions. Reforms announced with fanfare, implemented with loopholes, resulting in no real change. I commit to you that won't happen here, James said firmly. The legislation requires cameras active during all civilian interactions. No exceptions. The training includes testing to verify comprehension. The oversight boards have subpoena power and independent authority. Another community leader spoke up, Reverend Thomas Hunt from First Baptist Church. Governor, what happens to Officer Brennan? Our community wants to see accountability, not just policy changes. Officer Brennan has been terminated. He faces a civil lawsuit that could cost him millions. He may face criminal charges depending on what the investigation reveals, James replied. But here's what's important. Punishing Brennan doesn't fix the system that enabled him. We need both individual accountability and structural reform. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. By the end, James had their full support. They would mobilize their networks, apply pressure to legislators, and keep public attention focused on the issue. The call with the NAACP president covered similar ground, but with a national perspective. Governor Harrison, what happens in Virginia will influence reform efforts across the country. The president's voice was serious. If you succeed, other states will follow. If you fail, it sets back the entire movement. The pressure was enormous, but James had never shied from pressure. We won't fail, he replied simply. At 9 o'clock, the legal team briefed him on the lawsuit. Lead attorney Jackson Montgomery spread documents across the conference table. Governor, we've filed in federal court, which gives us access to broader civil rights statutes. The Richmond Police Department has 30 days to respond, but we expect them to request an extension. Will they try to settle quickly? James asked. Almost certainly, Montgomery replied. The video evidence is devastating. They have no defense. A settlement offer will come within 2 weeks, probably starting around $20 million. What should our response be? Montgomery looked at him carefully. That depends on your goals, Governor. If the goal is financial compensation, we negotiate from there. If the goal is institutional change, we reject settlement offers until they agree to court-supervised reforms. The goal is institutional change, James said without hesitation. I don't need the money. I need the police department to change how it operates. Then we reject initial settlement offers and demand monitored reforms as a condition of any resolution. Montgomery made notes. Be prepared for this to drag out for months. possibly years. "I've got time." After the legal team left, James finally had a moment alone in his office. The building had quieted. Most staff had gone home. The protesters outside had dispersed. The news vans had moved to their next story. James stood at the window looking out over Richmond. Somewhere in this city, Officer Todd Brennan was facing the destruction of everything he'd built. Somewhere, police officers were worried about their jobs, their authority, their safety. He understood their concerns. Police work was difficult, dangerous, and often thankless. Good officers deserved support, respect, and resources. But none of that justified what had happened in Franklin Park. None of that excused discrimination. None of that eliminated the need for accountability. His phone buzzed, a text from his daughter. "Dad, you were amazing on all the interviews today. Keep fighting." He smiled and replied, "Always." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The House Judiciary Committee would begin markup of the reform bill. Opposition would organize. Police unions would lobby. Conservative media would attack. But tonight, James allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd taken a personal injustice and transformed it into momentum for systematic change. He'd used his platform to amplify voices that had been ignored for too long. The work was far from over, but it had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. The Virginia House of Delegates chamber buzzed with tension. 100 delegates filled the rows of desks, some reviewing documents, others huddled in whispered conversations. The gallery above was packed with citizens, reporters, and lobbyists. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. James Harrison sat in the gallery's front row, a position usually reserved for dignitaries and special guests. Beside him, Isaiah Parker monitored social media reactions in real time. Natasha Coleman coordinated with the communications team stationed throughout the building. The Speaker of the House, Linda Gray, called the session to order at 10 o'clock precisely. Her gavel echoed through the chamber. "The House will come to order. Today we consider House Bill 847, the Law Enforcement Accountability Act, introduced by Delegate Marcus Freeman on behalf of Governor Harrison." Delegate Freeman, a black legislator from Richmond's East End, stood at the primary podium. He'd been working with James's team for 72 hours straight, refining language, building coalitions, counting votes. "Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this legislation addresses fundamental questions about policing in a democratic society." Freeman's voice carried clearly through the chamber. "How do we balance public safety with civil rights? How do we ensure that those who protect us do so equally and fairly?" He clicked a remote, and images appeared on screens throughout the chamber. The first was Tyrone Davis's video showing James in handcuffs. 4 days ago, Governor James Harrison was arrested while sitting peacefully in Franklin Park. He committed no crime. He posed no threat. He was simply a black man existing in a public space, and that was enough to justify arrest in Officer Todd Brennan's judgment. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded in agreement. This bill ensures what happened to Governor Harrison doesn't happen to anyone else. Freeman advanced to the next slide, showing the bill's key provisions. Mandatory body cameras, comprehensive bias training, civilian oversight, anonymous reporting. These aren't radical ideas. They're common-sense reforms that dozens of police departments across America have already adopted successfully. Delegate Harrison Thompson, no relation to the governor, rose to speak against the bill. A conservative from rural Southwest Virginia, he'd been organizing opposition since the bill was introduced. "Mr. Speaker, while we all regret what happened to Governor Harrison, this legislation goes too far." Thompson's voice was measured, reasonable. "Body cameras sound good in theory, but they're expensive. Small departments can't afford them. This bill mandates costs without providing resources." Freeman responded immediately. "The bill includes $15 million in state grants specifically for implementation. No department will be forced to absorb costs without support." Thompson pressed on. "What about the bias training requirements? 8 hours per officer, repeated quarterly. That's 32 hours per year taken away from actual police work. In small departments, that means officers off the street when they're needed most. Delegate, would you rather have officers on the street violating civil rights or properly trained officers protecting everyone equally? Freeman's tone sharpened. Those aren't competing priorities. They're complementary. The debate continued for 40 minutes. Delegate after delegate rose to speak. Some supported the bill passionately, sharing stories from their districts of police misconduct. Others opposed it cautiously, raising practical concerns while trying not to appear to defend discrimination. James watched carefully, making notes. Isaiah whispered updates on vote counts based on who spoke and how. "We're still at 66 firm supporters," Isaiah said quietly. "Thompson's arguments aren't swaying anyone new, but they're not losing supporters either." In the gallery, Terrence Adams and other community activists watched intently. They'd organized phone campaigns, office visits, and public demonstrations. Now they could only wait and see if it was enough. The speaker recognized Delegate Monica Harris from Northern Virginia. She was considered a swing vote, a moderate who could influence others. "Mr. Speaker, I've struggled with this bill," Harris began. "I represent a district with excellent police-community relations. Our officers are professional and respectful. When I first read this legislation, my instinct was that it wasn't necessary in my community." James tensed. This could go either way. "But then I watched the video of Governor Harrison being arrested." Harris continued, "And I realized that my officers might be excellent today, but what ensures they remain excellent tomorrow? What accountability exists if problems develop?" She paused, looking around the chamber. "This bill doesn't punish good police work. It protects it. Body cameras protect good officers from false accusations. Training prevents problems before they occur. Oversight provides legitimacy. I will vote yes." The activists in the gallery applauded before the speaker's gavel brought order. James allowed himself a small smile. Harris's support likely brought 3 or 4 other moderates with her. The debate stretched past noon. The speaker called a recess for lunch, but few delegates left the chamber. The tension was too high, the outcome too uncertain. James descended from the gallery to the corridor outside the chamber. Reporters swarmed immediately. "Governor Harrison, how confident are you about passage?" James measured his response carefully. "I'm confident that the delegates will do what's right. This isn't about politics. It's about basic civil rights. If the bill fails, what's your backup plan?" "It won't fail. The evidence is overwhelming. The need is clear. I trust that this body will act accordingly." A conservative radio host pushed forward. "Governor, police unions are calling this the most anti-cop legislation they've ever seen. How do you respond?" "I respond by pointing out that good cops have nothing to fear from accountability." James replied firmly. "This bill protects citizens and good officers. The only people who should oppose it are those who want to continue discriminatory practices without consequences." The afternoon session resumed at 1:30. The debate had shifted from general principles to specific amendments. Delegate after delegate proposed changes, some substantive, others procedural delays disguised as improvements. Freeman handled each amendment efficiently, accepting minor clarifications and rejecting attempts to weaken core provisions. At 3 o'clock, Delegate Thompson proposed an amendment that would make body camera activation discretionary for officers. "This gives officers professional judgment about when recording is appropriate," Thompson argued. "We trust them with weapons. We should trust them with cameras." Freeman demolished the argument quickly. "Delegate, the entire point of mandatory cameras is to prevent selective documentation. If officers can choose when to record, they'll inevitably choose not to record problematic interactions." The amendment failed, 48 to 52. Isaiah updated his vote count. "We're holding strong. If that amendment couldn't pass, nothing they propose will weaken the bill significantly." At 4:15, after 6 hours of debate, the speaker called for final passage. "The question is on passage of House Bill 847. All in favor, say aye." A chorus of ayes filled the chamber. "All opposed, nay." The nays were noticeably quieter. "The clerk will call the roll." The roll call took 12 minutes. Each delegate's vote was recorded individually, publicly, permanently. This wasn't a voice vote where positions could be obscured. Every delegate would own their decision. James kept a tally on his notepad. As expected, votes accumulated. He began to relax slightly. At 60 votes in favor, passage was certain. The question now was the margin. The final count was announced. 71 ayes, 29 nays. House Bill 847 is passed. The gallery erupted in applause. Terrence Adams and the activists hugged each other. Reporters scrambled to file stories. James stood and nodded to Freeman, who looked up from the floor with evident relief and satisfaction. Natasha was already drafting the press release. Isaiah was texting key supporters with thanks. James left the Capitol building through a side entrance, avoiding the main crowd. He had a meeting scheduled at the executive mansion with police chiefs from across Virginia. 1 year after the incident in Franklin Park, Virginia's police reform implementation showed measurable results. The quarterly report James reviewed in his office contained data that would have seemed impossible 12 months earlier. Body camera usage had reached 97% compliance across all departments. The 3% holdouts were small rural agencies that had been granted extensions due to technical infrastructure challenges, not resistance. Officer complaints had decreased by 41% statewide. Use of force incidents were down 33%. Traffic stop racial disparities had narrowed by 28%. Isaiah Parker presented the findings to James and his senior staff in the governor's conference room. The data suggests we're seeing real behavioral changes, not just procedural compliance, Isaiah explained, pointing to detailed charts. Officers are making different decisions when they know interactions are being recorded and reviewed. Natasha Coleman added her perspective. The public perception data is equally positive. Trust in police has increased by 19 points among Black Virginians. Overall approval of police is up 12 points statewide. But challenges remained. Some police unions continued fighting the reforms through legislative attempts to weaken requirements. Some oversight boards struggled with limited resources and hostile police departments. Some communities reported that cameras and training didn't change deeply ingrained attitudes. James addressed these challenges directly. Call the union presidents, all of them. I want a meeting next week. The meeting with police union leadership was tense. 7 union presidents gathered in the governor's office, most skeptical, some openly hostile. Governor, our members feel they're being treated like criminals. One president from Northern Virginia spoke for the group. Body cameras are watching their every move. Constant training, questioning their judgment. Civilian boards, second-guessing, split-second decisions. James leaned forward. Your members were hired to serve the public. The public has a right to know how that service is being performed. Body cameras protect good officers and expose bad ones. If your members are doing their jobs correctly, they have nothing to fear. But the lawsuits, another union president interjected. Officers are being sued personally for good faith actions. It's creating a chilling effect. Officers who violate civil rights should face lawsuits, James replied firmly. That's accountability. However, I'm willing to discuss additional legal protections for officers who follow proper procedures and act in good faith. What I won't discuss is eliminating accountability altogether. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, James had negotiated a compromise. The state would provide legal defense for officers sued while following proper procedures. In exchange, the unions would stop opposing oversight mechanisms and support additional bias training. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and progress was the goal. Meanwhile, the federal government had taken notice. The Department of Justice invited James to Washington to brief Attorney General staff on Virginia's reform model. James traveled to Washington with Candace Wright and Isaiah. They met in a secure conference room with DOJ officials, congressional staff, and White House policy advisors. Governor Harrison, thank you for coming. The Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights opened the meeting. Virginia's reforms are the most comprehensive we've seen at the state level. We're considering recommending them as a national model. James presented Virginia's experience honestly, including both successes and challenges. Body cameras work, but only with strict activation policies. Training works, but only if it's ongoing and tested. Oversight works, but only if boards have real power and resources. The key is implementation details, not just general principles. A White House advisor asked, "What would you do differently if you were starting over?" James considered carefully. "I'd focus more on changing police culture from within rather than just imposing rules from above. The reforms I implemented were necessary, but external. What's really needed is internal transformation where officers themselves drive change." "Can that happen?" the advisor pressed. "It's starting to," James replied. "We're seeing younger officers embrace accountability. We're seeing some departments voluntarily exceeding minimum requirements. Culture change is slow, but it's possible." The DOJ meeting led to an invitation to testify before Congress. James appeared before the House Judiciary Committee to discuss federal police reform legislation. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Representatives from both parties sat in tiered rows, ready to question him. "Governor Harrison, welcome." The committee chairman opened. "You've become a national symbol of police reform. Tell us what happened to you and what you've done about it." James recounted the Franklin Park incident one more time. He'd told the story hundreds of times now, but it never became routine. Each telling reminded him why the work mattered. Then he presented Virginia's reforms, the implementation challenges, and the measurable results. Representative questions ranged from supportive to skeptical. A conservative Republican from Alabama challenged his approach. "Governor, aren't you making it impossible for police to do their jobs? Officers are afraid to engage suspects, afraid to use force even when appropriate, afraid of constant scrutiny." James responded calmly. "Representative, police in Virginia made over 2 million arrests last year. Use of force complaints decreased while arrest rates remained stable. Officers are still doing their jobs. They're just doing them with more accountability." A progressive Democrat from California praised his reforms but pushed for more. "Governor Harrison, your reforms are good, but they don't address the root issue. Should we be rethinking policing fundamentally? Perhaps moving some functions to social workers or community programs?" James nodded. "That's a fair question. Virginia is piloting programs where mental health professionals respond to certain calls instead of armed officers. Early results are promising, but complete reimagining of policing is beyond what I could implement unilaterally. That requires broader social consensus." The hearing lasted 5 hours. James testified for 3, then answered questions for 2 more. By the end, he'd made his case to a national audience. The congressional testimony raised his national profile significantly. Presidential speculation began appearing in political columns. Would Governor Harrison run for higher office? James deflected such questions. "My focus is on implementing reforms in Virginia, not planning future campaigns." But the speculation persisted. And truthfully, James had started thinking about it. The reforms he'd implemented in Virginia could be national policy with federal authority. The changes he'd forced in one state could happen in all 50. Not yet, though. The work in Virginia wasn't finished. 18 months after the incident, James visited police academies to see how recruit training had changed. At the Virginia State Police Academy in Hanover County, he observed a training session focused on de-escalation and bias recognition. Young recruits, diverse in race and gender, practiced scenarios. An instructor played a civilian sitting on a bench. A recruit approached. "Sir, we've received a report of suspicious activity. Can I ask what you're doing here?" "Just sitting, enjoying the weather." "May I see some identification?" "Sure." The instructor reached slowly for a wallet. The recruit maintained appropriate distance, stayed calm, and accepted the ID respectfully. "Thank you, sir. Have a nice day." The instructor stood and addressed the class. Notice what happened there. The officer asked questions, gathered information, and made an assessment without assuming criminality. That's professional policing. The instructor saw James watching and invited him to address the recruits. "Recruits, this is Governor Harrison. Many of you know his story. He's here to talk to you about the reforms you're training under." James stood before the class of 50 recruits. They represented Virginia's future in law enforcement. What he said to them mattered. Recruits, you're entering policing at a pivotal time. The standards are higher, the scrutiny is greater, the expectations are more demanding. Some people will tell you that makes the job impossible. They're wrong. He paused, making eye contact with recruits throughout the room. Higher standards make you better officers. Scrutiny keeps you honest. Demanding expectations push you to excellence. You're being trained to be professional guardians of public safety, not warriors fighting enemies. That's a higher calling, not a lower one. A black female recruit raised her hand. "Governor, do you think what happened to you would happen to one of us?" James answered honestly. "I hope not, but the reforms we've implemented reduce that risk significantly. Body cameras document interactions. Training gives you better tools than bias. Oversight creates consequences for misconduct. You're entering a system that's better than the one I encountered." After leaving the academy, James met with the training director privately. "Director, are these reforms changing recruit quality? Are you attracting different candidates?" The director nodded. "We're getting more college graduates, more candidates with social work backgrounds, more people who see policing as community service rather than law enforcement. And we're retaining them at higher rates because they feel supported by the accountability systems rather than threatened." That's exactly what we hoped would happen. The reforms had created a virtuous cycle. Better policies attracted better candidates. Better training produced better officers. Better officers improved community relations. Improved relations made policing more effective. But not everyone was convinced. Critics on the right claimed James had neutered police effectiveness. Critics on the left said the reforms didn't go far enough. Political opponents used the issue to attack him. At a town hall meeting in conservative Southwest Virginia, James faced hostile questions. "Governor, you've made Virginia soft on crime." A man in the audience shouted, "Criminals know officers are afraid to use force. Crime is going to explode." James responded with data. Crime rates in Virginia have continued the downward trend that started before these reforms. Violent crime is down 3%. Property crime is down 7%. The reforms haven't made us less safe. They've made us more just without sacrificing safety. At a different event in liberal Charlottesville, an activist challenged him from the opposite direction. "Governor, you're still funding police at the same levels. You haven't moved resources to community programs. You've reformed policing rather than rethinking it." James acknowledged the concern. "You're right that I haven't defunded police. I don't believe that's practical or wise. But I have increased funding for mental health services, community programs, and alternative response models. Reform and reimagining aren't mutually exclusive." The political attacks intensified as his second year as governor progressed. Opposition legislators introduced bills to weaken the reforms. Police unions funded attack ads. Conservative media outlets ran critical segments. But James held firm. He vetoed every bill that would undermine accountability. He defended the reforms in every interview. He used his platform to keep public attention focused on the issue, and the data supported him. Every quarterly report showed continued improvement. Every independent analysis validated the reform's effectiveness. Every academic study confirmed that accountability and effective policing could coexist. 2 years after the incident, James stood again in Franklin Park for the second anniversary commemoration. The crowd was smaller this time. The media attention was less intense. The moment had become normalized rather than extraordinary. And that was precisely the point. Reform had moved from crisis response to standard practice. Accountability had become routine rather than revolutionary. James spoke to the assembled crowd about progress and persistence. 2 years ago, I was arrested on this spot. It was wrong. It was unjust, but it catalyzed changes that have made Virginia a better, fairer place. We've implemented comprehensive reforms. We've seen measurable results. We've created systems that protect everyone's rights while maintaining public safety. He looked around at the diverse crowd, at the families enjoying the park, at the officers patrolling respectfully nearby. But the work isn't finished. It never is. Every generation must defend rights, demand accountability, and insist on justice. What we've accomplished in Virginia is significant, but it's not sufficient. We must continue improving, continue learning, continue striving for a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. After the speech, a reporter asked about his political future. "Governor, you've been mentioned as a potential presidential candidate. Are you considering a run?" James smiled. "Right now, I'm focused on being governor of Virginia, but I won't deny that what we've accomplished here could be a model for the entire country. If there's an opportunity to implement these reforms nationally, I'd be interested in that conversation." James smiled. That was the plan. Use this moment of maximum attention to force changes that had been needed for decades. The speculation about higher office lingered, though James never said more than he intended. For now, he was still the governor of Virginia, and the responsibilities in front of him were enormous. 2 weeks after the law was signed, James returned quietly to Franklin Park with only Natasha and 2 security staff. The day was cooler, with leaves swirling across the paths. The bench where it all began sat empty, sunlight flickering across its bronze plaque. James sat down, deliberately choosing the same seat. A few passers-by recognized him and stopped, unsure whether to approach. Natasha gave them a small nod, granting silent permission. Within minutes, a small group had gathered. An older black woman, her cane resting against the bench, spoke first. "Governor, I was here that day. I didn't speak up. I was afraid." James reached for her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters. Silence then doesn't erase your voice now." A young Latino man added, "My brother was arrested last year, same way. No cameras, no proof. Your fight is our fight." James listened carefully, jotting notes in the small black notebook he carried everywhere now. The park was more than a setting. It had become a living reminder of accountability, a civic classroom where the lessons were never abstract. By the 4th week after the signing, the national media began shifting angles. Supportive coverage was still dominant, but conservative outlets intensified their framing. Commentators labeled James as the most anti-police governor in America. Editorial cartoons showed him cutting police budgets with giant scissors, even though funding had in fact increased. Natasha flagged the shift during a late-night strategy session. "Governor, the honeymoon phase is ending. Opponents are finding their message. We need to prepare for the next wave." James wasn't surprised. That's politics. We counter facts with facts. But more than that, we show results. He leaned forward. Every statistic, every data point, crime rates, complaint resolution, body camera compliance, we make them public. If transparency is our weapon, we use it relentlessly. Meanwhile, Todd Brennan was drowning. He'd moved out of Richmond, renting a small house in his cousin's backyard in Henrico County. His wife had filed for divorce. His children no longer lived with him. Death threats still trickled into his inbox. Job offers? None. A local newspaper managed to interview him once, catching him outside a grocery store. His words were halting, ashamed. "I thought I was just doing my job, but I see now I wasn't. I destroyed myself. I destroyed trust. I'll never work in law enforcement again." The clip aired briefly, but James never commented publicly. Privately, he told Natasha, "Brennan's punishment is already more than enough. I'm not interested in vengeance. I'm interested in change." 12 months after the arrest, Richmond held an official commemoration at Franklin Park. The bench was now a permanent landmark. Tyrone Davis, the teenager who had filmed everything, stood beside James as the crowd applauded. Tyrone had just been accepted into Howard University with a scholarship. When he took the microphone, his voice cracked with nerves but steadied quickly. "I just wanted the truth out there. I didn't know it would change the state. But if one video can do this, imagine what we can all do together." The crowd erupted in applause. James shook his hand, whispering, "You did more than some legislators ever will." By year's end, 5 other states had introduced reform bills modeled on Virginia's law. The DOJ published a report calling Virginia's implementation the most comprehensive accountability framework at the state level in modern U.S. history. James was invited to speak at a National Governors Association summit. He stood before colleagues, some skeptical, some inspired. I didn't ask for what happened to me, but I'm glad it did, because it forced us to stop pretending everything was fine. Change is never convenient, it's never comfortable, but it's always necessary. The applause was thunderous, though not universal. A handful of governors shook their heads, already preparing to oppose similar reforms in their states. That night, alone in his study, James revisited the footage one last time. His own face in handcuffs, Brennan's aggression, the crowd's disbelief. He replayed it not out of pain, but to remind himself, this is where it began. If I forget the bench, I forget the purpose. And if I forget the purpose, then all of this was for nothing. He closed his tablet, rose from his desk, and looked out over Richmond. The city lights flickered in the distance. For the first time since Franklin Park, he allowed himself the smallest measure of peace. The war was far from over, but the first battle had been won. The storm had not passed, it had only shifted. 1 year after the Franklin Park arrest, Governor James Harrison's reforms were embedded in Virginia law. Body cameras were strapped to nearly every officer's uniform, oversight boards were combing through complaints, and training academies were reshaped with new curricula. But now came the harder part, the backlash. In Richmond, opposition forces were mobilizing. Police unions, conservative think tanks, and even some suburban parent groups began organizing rallies under a familiar banner: Protect Our Police. At one rally outside the Capitol, a retired officer shouted into a microphone, "They want to take away discretion. They want to tie officers' hands. They want criminals running free in our neighborhoods." The crowd cheered, waving blue and black flags. Signs read, "Harrison, anti-cop, and back the blue, fire the governor." Inside his office, James watched the footage on a muted television. Natasha stood beside him, arms crossed. "They're coming hard, Governor. This isn't just noise. They're raising money. They're planning a campaign." Isaiah Parker added the numbers. "Our approval ratings dipped 5 points last week among suburban voters. The reform supporters are still energized, but the other side has found its message." James leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Good, let them speak. Every word they say defending misconduct will be compared to the video, and the video wins every time." Meanwhile, Todd Brennan's world had shrunk to the size of a rented trailer on the outskirts of Petersburg. He avoided grocery stores in daylight. His children refused to visit. Job applications went unanswered. The internet had made him infamous. His name was a hashtag. His face appeared in memes, captions mocking him as the cop who arrested a governor for sitting. Even minor outings risked humiliation. A teenager once recognized him in a gas station and muttered, "Racist cop." Brennan had left without buying anything. One night, a local reporter tracked him down, camera crew in tow. Brennan answered the door, shirtless, eyes red, a half-empty beer in hand. "Mr. Brennan," the reporter asked, "do you feel remorse?" Brennan closed the door without answering. The clip aired anyway. Public pity was scarce. The story had moved on from him, but not enough for him to escape it. By now, James was a regular presence on national television. Morning shows invited him as a guest. Evening anchors introduced him as the governor who turned a personal injustice into sweeping reform. On 60 Minutes, the interviewer leaned forward, voice heavy with gravitas. "Governor Harrison, do you consider yourself the face of police reform in America?" James hesitated before answering. "I don't want to be a face. I want to be a bridge. If my experience can connect lived injustice to real policy change, then I'll accept that role. But this isn't about me, it's about every American who's been silenced or ignored." The segment drew millions of viewers. Polls showed his name recognition had jumped nationally. Quietly, political operatives began testing his viability for a presidential run. Natasha warned him, "The more your profile rises, the more enemies you'll collect. Be ready for the knives." James smiled grimly. "The knives have been out for years. Now they're just sharper." In the Virginia General Assembly, cracks began to appear. Some moderate Democrats grew nervous about their suburban districts. Crime, though statistically lower, felt higher to anxious voters. Conservative radio hosts fueled the perception. telling stories of emboldened criminals and hesitant cops. One Democratic delegate confronted James privately. "Governor, I support the reforms. I voted for them. But my constituents don't see safer streets. They see more headlines about officers being afraid to act. I could lose my seat over this." James's response was sharp. "Then tell your constituents the truth. Tell them crime hasn't risen. Tell them accountability doesn't mean paralysis. If you can't defend justice, maybe you shouldn't hold the seat." The delegate walked away, shaken. James didn't regret it. Politics was fragile. Justice couldn't be. As if scripted by fate, a new incident ignited the debate. In Norfolk, an officer's body camera captured a routine traffic stop gone wrong. The driver, a young black Navy sailor, complied with every order. Yet the officer drew his gun, shouting contradictory commands. The sailor froze, terrified. Backup arrived, escalating the chaos. The footage ended with the sailor handcuffed on the ground, sobbing, "I did everything you said." The sailor's commanding officer released a statement within hours. "Petty Officer Marcus Green has served honorably. He committed no crime. What he experienced is unacceptable." The video went viral. Again, commentators linked it immediately to Franklin Park. The system hasn't changed fast enough. James addressed the press the next morning. "This is exactly why we passed reforms, and it's exactly why they must be enforced without delay. Body cameras didn't prevent misconduct, but they revealed it. That's progress. Now accountability must follow." The Norfolk officer was suspended. Investigations began, but the incident proved what James already knew: laws were only the beginning. Culture would take years to change. Meanwhile, the lawsuit against Brennan and the Richmond Police Department advanced. In federal court, Brennan appeared gaunt. His once proud posture collapsed. Civil rights attorneys laid out the case with surgical precision: the unlawful arrest, the ignored identification, the prior complaints of profiling. During cross-examination, Brennan finally admitted under oath what many suspected. "I stopped him because he looked suspicious." "And what was suspicious about him?" the lawyer pressed. "He was just sitting there, a black man in a nice park. It didn't fit." The courtroom went silent. Reporters scribbled furiously. The words would haunt Brennan forever. The case didn't go to trial. Richmond settled, as James had demanded, with federal oversight included. But Brennan's testimony leaked, and it became another viral moment, a soundbite that crystallized systemic bias in raw, unfiltered form. Inspired by Virginia, activists in other states pushed for similar laws. In Maryland, reform bills advanced through committee. In North Carolina, protesters rallied outside the State House chanting, "Virginia did it, so can we." Some states resisted fiercely. Texas and Florida governors mocked Harrison publicly. "We don't take orders from Richmond," one quipped at a rally. Conservative media hosts framed Harrison as a man who hates cops but loves criminals. Yet the tide was shifting. Polls showed majority support nationwide for body cameras and independent oversight. Harrison's name became shorthand for accountability, loved by some, hated by others, but impossible to ignore. For James, the national spotlight came at a personal cost. His daughter, still studying law, received threats online. His wife's private life became tabloid fodder. Protesters occasionally appeared outside the governor's mansion with bullhorns, chanting late into the night. One evening over dinner, his daughter asked quietly, "Dad, was it worth it, all of this? Our family can't even walk downtown without stairs." James put down his fork. "Sweetheart, if even one person's rights are protected because of this, then yes, it's worth it, all of it. But I won't pretend it's easy." She nodded, though her eyes remained clouded with worry. By the end of Harrison's second year as governor, Virginia was a different state. Police reform was no longer just a bill on paper. It was a daily reality, shaping arrests, shaping complaints, shaping culture. Yet the nation was more divided than ever. To his supporters, Harrison was a hero. To his detractors, a villain. To history, he was becoming a symbol. Standing once again on the steps of the Capitol, addressing reporters about the Norfolk case, James concluded with words that echoed far beyond Virginia. Accountability is not anti-police. It is pro-democracy, it is pro-justice, and it is non-negotiable. The cameras clicked, the headlines wrote themselves. And James Harrison, once a man humiliated in a public park, was now a figure whose fight for justice had transformed not only his state, but the nation's conversation. The glow of victory had begun to fade. Reforms were in place. Oversight boards were meeting, and body cameras were strapped across Virginia. But politics has no resting place. The forces aligned against James Harrison had regrouped, and now they were striking back. By the start of Harrison's third year as governor, invitations to national forums multiplied. He was asked to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, appear at civil rights conferences in Atlanta, and even deliver a keynote address at Harvard Law School. Each event raised his profile further. But with each step into the national arena, the attacks sharpened. Conservative senators called him a demagogue in a governor's suit. Police unions from states far beyond Virginia issued statements condemning his reforms as a blueprint for tying the hands of officers. On cable news, a commentator declared, "Harrison wants officers to second-guess themselves into the grave. He wants criminals empowered and cops disarmed." Yet just as loud were the voices hailing him as a reformer whose courage matched the times. The New York Times dubbed him the reluctant reformer who became a national conscience. The Washington Post ran a profile titled, "From a Park Bench to the Capitol Steps, the Governor Who Wouldn't Be Silent." No one had expected Tyrone Davis, the teenager who filmed the Franklin Park arrest, to remain central to the story 2 years later. But his video had become more than viral content. It was evidence, history, a catalyst. Now a sophomore at Howard University, Tyrone balanced coursework with speaking engagements. Civil rights groups invited him to panels. Universities paid him to lecture on the power of witness. His social media following had grown to nearly 2 million. But the fame weighed on him. In his dorm room, he confided to a friend, "I didn't ask to be this guy. I just pulled out my phone, and now people call me an activist like I planned this." When he met Harrison again in Washington, Tyrone admitted the struggle. "Governor, I'm not sure I can keep doing this. Everyone looks at me like I've got answers. I don't. I just pressed record." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tyrone, history rarely asks permission. It chooses people. You didn't ask for this role, but you have it. The question is, what will you do with it?" Tyrone looked down, conflicted, but deep inside he knew Harrison was right. In contrast, Todd Brennan's life continued its downward collapse. Divorced, unemployable, and publicly shamed, he lived off odd jobs and dwindling savings. In an interview with a minor podcast, Brennan's bitterness spilled. "The governor destroyed me. One mistake and my whole life's gone. No one cares what it's like to be a cop making split-second calls. No one cares about the pressure." But even in his complaints, the world heard what it always had: self-justification without accountability. The comments section beneath the podcast episode was merciless. "You weren't destroyed by the governor, you destroyed yourself." Still blaming others. Typical. Brennan had become a cautionary tale, taught in police academies as what not to do. His name was footnoted in law textbooks. He was infamous in ways few could survive. Back in Virginia, Harrison's reforms faced attempts at repeal. Conservative delegates introduced bills to weaken oversight boards, reduce camera requirements, and extend discretion clauses for officers. In committee hearings, debate was fierce. One delegate thundered, "Governor Harrison's laws are crippling our departments. Officers are leaving in droves. Recruitment is collapsing." But the numbers told a different story. Isaiah Parker presented data showing that while some older officers had retired early, applications from younger, college-educated recruits were up by 14%. Complaints of misconduct were down. Crime rates continued their slow decline. James testified personally at one hearing. If accountability drives out officers who can't serve with integrity, then accountability is doing its job. Virginia doesn't need more officers, we need better officers, and the reforms ensure we have them. The bill to weaken oversight failed by a narrow margin, 48-52. It was a reminder. Victories could still be lost. By now, whispers of a presidential run had turned into open speculation. Journalists asked about it constantly. Polls showed Harrison with national name recognition approaching 70%. Among Democratic primary voters, he ranked third behind established senators. At a private dinner in Washington, a senior party strategist leaned across the table. "Governor, you've got the profile, the story, the momentum. You could be the one. The nomination, maybe even the White House. Are you thinking about it?" James gave the same answer he always did. "My job is to be governor of Virginia. That's where my focus is." But later that night, alone in his hotel room, he admitted to himself what he hadn't said aloud. "Of course I've thought about it." The political storm weighed heavily on Harrison's family. His wife, Angela, a private woman by nature, struggled with the public scrutiny. Her movements were followed by reporters. Her words at charity events were parsed for political meaning. "I didn't marry a president, James," she told him late one night, tears in her eyes. "I married a man, and sometimes I feel like I've lost him." James held her hands. "I know, and I don't want this to consume us. But I also can't walk away. Not now. Not when we're making progress." Their marriage endured, but the tension was constant. Every victory in public came with a cost in private. In the summer of Harrison's third year, tragedy struck. In Roanoke, a black teenager named Aaron Caldwell was shot by police during a mistaken traffic stop. The body camera footage showed confusion, panic, and a single shot fired after the teenager reached for his phone. The city erupted. Protests filled the streets. National media descended. Once again, Harrison was thrust into the center of crisis. At a press conference, his voice was solemn. "A young man is dead tonight. His name is Aaron Caldwell. He should be alive. The investigation will determine accountability. But let me be clear. This is why reform must continue. This is why training matters. This is why accountability is not negotiable." The officer resigned within days, but the community's grief was raw. Harrison visited Aaron's mother personally, sitting with her in silence as she wept. Later, he told Natasha, "No law can bring him back, but maybe our laws can prevent the next one." The Roanoke tragedy galvanized reformers nationwide. Civil rights groups praised Harrison for his swift response. 3 more states introduced reform packages modeled on Virginia's law, but opponents doubled down. Police unions organized the largest rally yet in Richmond, 10,000 officers and supporters marching with signs reading, "Hands off our cops." National politicians joined the chorus, accusing Harrison of politicizing tragedy. The divide was stark. In polls, Harrison's approval among black voters soared above 90%. Among conservative whites, it dipped below 30. The polarization was complete. The White House invited Harrison for a private meeting with the president. In the Oval Office, the president, a centrist Democrat wary of controversy, was candid. "James, you've stirred a hornet's nest. I admire your courage, but you're putting heat on all of us. Police unions are furious. Swing state governors are nervous. We can't afford to lose them." James didn't flinch. "Mr. President, justice isn't optional. If we lose police unions because we stood for accountability, maybe they were never ours to begin with." The president sighed. "You're principled, James, but principles don't always win elections." James left the White House more certain than ever. If higher office was in his future, it would be on his terms, not anyone else's. Meanwhile, Todd Brennan reached rock bottom. Evicted from his trailer, he drifted between couches. His drinking worsened. One night, he was arrested for public intoxication. His mugshot plastered across local news with the headline, "Disgraced Officer Arrested Again." For James, the news was bittersweet. Natasha asked if he wanted to comment. "No, let him fade quietly. His downfall doesn't need more cameras. The real story isn't Brennan, it's the system that allowed him to be Brennan." And yet, in ways no one admitted aloud, Brennan's continuing collapse served as a warning, a symbol of what unchecked bias could lead to. By the end of Harrison's third year, Virginia's reforms were no longer just state policy, they were a movement. Community meetings drew hundreds. Police academies reported cultural shifts. Citizens who once distrusted law enforcement began cautiously re-engaging. At a town hall in Richmond, an elderly black man stood to speak. "Governor, I've lived 70 years in this city. I've been stopped more times than I can count. For the first time, I believe maybe things can change. Thank you." The applause was long and loud. James smiled, but inside he knew. Gratitude was fragile. Only sustained results could preserve it. As the third anniversary of Franklin Park approached, James returned once again to the bench. This time he wasn't alone. His wife, Angela, sat beside him. His daughter, nearly finished with law school, sat on the other side. 3 years ago, James said softly, this was just a park bench. Now it's a symbol. Angela rested her head on his shoulder. Symbols fade. What matters is what you've built around it. His daughter added, and what you'll do next. James looked at them both, the family that had carried him through the storm. In the distance, reporters waited, cameras ready, but for a brief moment he allowed himself peace. The journey was far from over. The opposition was fierce. The presidential question loomed larger than ever. But James Harrison had already proven one truth. A man handcuffed on a park bench could change a state. And perhaps, just perhaps, change a nation. The third anniversary of Franklin Park had come and gone. The bronze plaque on the bench gleamed in the autumn sun, already weathered by rain and fingerprints from visitors who traced its words. It was no longer just a bench. It was a pilgrimage site, a place where citizens, students, and tourists came to reflect on how quickly an ordinary moment could become history. But James Harrison's work was no longer confined to Virginia. The bench had launched him into a national battle that was larger, louder, and far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. By the start of his 4th year as governor, 7 states had passed legislation modeled directly on Virginia's reforms. Another 12 had introduced similar bills. Civil rights groups hailed it as a Harrison wave. But for every success, there was resistance. In Texas, a new law explicitly banned local jurisdictions from adopting Harrison-style civilian oversight. Florida's governor mocked him at a rally, declaring, "We don't need Virginia telling us how to police our streets." Cable networks turned the story into a permanent segment. One host labeled the divide, the Harrison states versus the blue states. It became another fault line in an already fractured nation. James watched the coverage in his study one evening. Natasha Coleman, always blunt, summarized the situation. "You're no longer just a governor. You're a symbol. Half the country sees you as the future. The other half sees you as the enemy." James didn't flinch. Symbols are useful, as long as we don't forget the work beneath them. When James was called to testify before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, the nation tuned in. The hearing room was packed with cameras, reporters, and aides scribbling notes. Senator Marcus Ellison, a liberal ally from Illinois, welcomed him warmly. "Governor Harrison, thank you for your leadership. Virginia has shown what's possible." But the opposition was waiting. Senator Conrad Blake, a conservative firebrand, leaned into his microphone. "Governor, let me get this straight. You're saying our brave officers should be paralyzed by fear of lawsuits every time they make a tough call? Isn't that just inviting criminals to run wild?" James leaned forward, calm but firm. "Senator, accountability doesn't paralyze good officers. It protects them. Body cameras clear officers of false accusations every day. Oversight ensures the public trusts their work. What paralyzes communities is fear of being profiled, harassed, or killed without cause." The exchange went viral. Supporters replayed James's composure. Detractors replayed Blake's accusations. Both sides claimed victory. Even in disgrace, Todd Brennan remained part of the story. His deposition had been quoted in court filings across the country. His infamous words, "he didn't fit," were printed in textbooks, cited in training slides, debated on news shows. For James, Brennan was no longer a person but a ghost, an embodiment of everything broken in the system. Yet late at night, James sometimes wondered about the man himself. "Do you ever think about him?" Angela asked one evening, surprising James. "Yes," James admitted, "because I know if the system had held him accountable sooner, that day in Franklin Park might never have happened." Angela was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I almost feel sorry for him." James shook his head. "I don't, but I feel sorry for the culture that made him think he was right." The Harrison family bore the weight of James's rising profile. His daughter, now a law school graduate, passed the bar and joined a civil rights firm in D.C. She threw herself into the movement, sometimes more aggressively than James himself. At dinner one weekend, she challenged him. "Dad, you're still talking about reform, but reform assumes the system is worth saving. Maybe we need to start over. Maybe policing as we know it can't be fixed." James sighed. "I understand your frustration, but tearing everything down without a plan risks chaos. I've seen what happens when law enforcement collapses. It's not justice, it's anarchy. Or maybe it's a chance to build something new." The generational divide was clear. Even within his own family, the debate over how far to push change was alive. As his profile grew, so did the threats. The governor's mansion was ringed with tighter security. Online death threats became routine. FBI briefings revealed organized groups plotting disruptions at his events. One night, Secret Service agents intercepted a man outside the mansion carrying a rifle. He'd posted online, "Harrison is destroying cops. Time to stop him." Angela was shaken. "James, this is getting worse. It's not just politics anymore. It's dangerous." James held her close. "I know. But if they want to silence me, that means the message is working, and I won't be silent." In spring, a shockwave hit American politics. The sitting president announced he would not seek re-election, citing health concerns. The Democratic field suddenly opened. Within hours, pundits listed potential successors. James Harrison's name was near the top. Natasha was blunt. "Governor, this changes everything. You'll be asked directly now. Are you running for president?" James paused, staring out the mansion window. He could hear chants from a small protest outside. "Justice now! Justice now!" "I'm not ready to answer," he said finally. "Not yet." In May, James met privately with Reverend Samuel Green, a civil rights elder who had marched with Dr. King. They sat in a quiet church office away from cameras. "Governor," Green said softly, "you've done more in 3 years than some do in decades. But you must understand the movement is bigger than Virginia now. People are looking to you as the national voice." "I never wanted to be a national voice," James admitted. Green smiled. "That's why you're the right one. The people who want power rarely deserve it. The ones who resist it often do." James left the meeting with a weight heavier than before. The question of higher office was no longer hypothetical. It was pressing. In July, another video swept the nation. This time, in Arizona, officers were seen forcing a black mother and her young children onto hot pavement at gunpoint after a shoplifting report that turned out to be false. James condemned it immediately. "This isn't policing. This is abuse. And until accountability is national, we will keep seeing this tragedy replayed." His words trended again, but so did the backlash. A senator from Arizona called him a grandstanding East Coast liberal who doesn't understand real policing. The division was now national theater. Every incident, every comment, every law passed or rejected was refracted through the lens of Harrison versus his critics. Late one night, James walked alone through the mansion garden. The air was heavy with summer humidity. He remembered the bench in Franklin Park, the sting of the cuffs, the humiliation, the fury. Had he done enough? Were the reforms holding? Was the system truly changing or just bending until the cameras turned away? Angela found him there, staring at the stars. "You can't save the whole country, James." He looked at her. "Maybe not, but maybe I can start it down the right path." At the 4th anniversary of Franklin Park, thousands gathered. What had once been a local commemoration was now a national event. Activists flew in from across the country. Networks broadcast live. Standing on the same bench, James addressed the crowd. 4 years ago, I was handcuffed on this very spot. 4 years ago, I was treated not as a citizen, not as a governor, but as a suspect because of how I looked. That day, I vowed change, and change has come, but it is not enough." The crowd cheered. He raised his voice. "We need national standards. We need accountability across 50 states, not just one. And we will not stop until justice belongs to every American." The chant began instantly. "Run, James! Run! Run, James! Run!" He held up his hands, smiling but silent. He didn't answer, but the moment said more than words could. Back in the governor's mansion that night, Isaiah handed him fresh polling. "You're leading in hypothetical primaries. You're the only candidate with double-digit support across black voters, young voters, and suburban moderates. If you run, you're in the top tier instantly." James set the papers aside. Polls don't matter if the purpose is lost. Angela asked the question that no strategist could. "Do you want this, James? Do you really want to run for president?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at Richmond's skyline glowing in the night. "Want isn't the word," he said finally. "Need is." The silence hung heavy. For the first time, James Harrison allowed himself to consider not just reforming Virginia, but leading America. The chants of "Run, James, run" still echoed in his ears. The Franklin Park anniversary had become more than a commemoration. It was a coronation of sorts, a public declaration that the governor of Virginia was no longer just a state leader. He was a national figure, a man whose personal humiliation had transformed into a movement for justice. But with coronation came consequence. If James Harrison even thought about higher office, he would be stepping onto the most treacherous battlefield of all American presidential politics. The morning after the rally, the phones in the governor's mansion never stopped ringing. Reporters called, strategists emailed, party officials requested just a quick chat. Natasha Coleman walked into James's study carrying a thick folder. "These are the exploratory memos. Fundraising projections, polling numbers, possible donor networks. They've been coming in all night. Everyone wants to know if you're in." James frowned. "I haven't even decided if I want to run." "That's not how this works anymore," Natasha replied. "The second those chants started, you became a candidate whether you announce it or not. The only question now is if you'll seize the momentum or let it pass." Angela, listening from the doorway, folded her arms. "And what about us? What about this family? Every skeleton in our closet will be dragged out, every argument, every mistake magnified 1,000 times. James looked at her with quiet resolve. "I know, and I don't want to put you through that, but if not me, then who? Who else is going to fight this fight on the biggest stage?" If Harrison's star was rising, so too was the campaign against him. Conservative PACs launched attack ads in Virginia and beyond. One grainy commercial showed rioters clashing with police, the narrator's voice ominous. "While America burns, Governor James Harrison wants to handcuff the police. Is this the man you want leading our country?" Another ad dredged up old cases Harrison had argued as a lawyer, twisting his defense of indigent clients into soft-on-crime narratives. Within days, the phrase "handcuff Harrison" became a trending hashtag on right-wing media. Natasha showed him the data. "They're testing their lines of attack. If you run, this is just the preview." James barely glanced at the paper. "Let them come. Truth is stronger than fear-mongering. We've proved it before." Before James could think nationally, he faced a test at home. The Virginia legislature narrowly passed a bill that sought to limit the powers of civilian review boards. It was a direct challenge to his reforms. James convened his advisors. Isaiah Parker urged caution. "Governor, the bill passed with bipartisan support. If you veto it, you risk alienating moderates we may need later. Maybe we negotiate instead." James shook his head. "No negotiation. If I compromise here, everything we built crumbles." The veto came swiftly. Standing at his desk, cameras rolling, James declared, "I will not sign away accountability, not today, not ever." The veto energized his supporters and enraged his critics. The battle lines in Virginia hardened once again. Meanwhile, Tyrone Davis, the young man whose video had started it all, was facing his own crossroads. Now, 21, he was offered a lucrative book deal to tell his story. Civil rights groups begged him to join full-time as an activist, but Tyrone wanted a quieter life. In a phone call with James, he confessed, "Governor, I don't know if I can keep being the guy with the video. I want to finish school, maybe become a teacher. People expect me to be something I'm not sure I am." James listened carefully. "Tyrone, you don't owe anyone a lifetime of activism. You already changed the world once. That's more than most do in a lifetime. The rest of your life should be yours." Tyrone sighed in relief. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." It was a reminder to James. Symbols came with crushing weight. Not everyone could carry it forever. Then came the national debate. Not a presidential debate yet, but a televised town hall on policing reforms, hosted by CNN. Governors, senators, and law enforcement leaders sat on stage. Harrison was the star attraction. When asked if America needed national standards, James answered without hesitation, "Yes, because justice should not depend on your zip code. If accountability works in Virginia, it can work everywhere. If one state can prevent unnecessary deaths, then every state should. Anything less is a betrayal of American ideals." The crowd erupted in applause. His opponents attacked, but James's calm, moral authority shone through. Analysts declared him the winner of the night. Headlines the next morning read, "Harrison sounds like a candidate." Yet behind the applause, the strain deepened. Angela was increasingly weary of life under siege. The couple's once private dinners were now punctuated by bodyguards and interruptions. Their daughter, now a rising attorney, openly pressed him to run for president, even as Angela resisted. One night, the three sat together in the mansion dining room. "Angela, if you run, we'll lose any semblance of a normal life." Daughter, "Mom, normal life is already gone. Whether he runs or not, Dad's already a national figure. The only question is if he steps up or steps aside." James listened silently, torn between them. The family that had carried him this far was now split on the path ahead. As if summoned by fate, Todd Brennan reappeared in headlines. Homeless and nearly destitute, he was arrested again, this time for assault during a drunken altercation. The mugshot told the story. Sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, a shadow of the once proud officer. James read the article in silence. Finally, he said quietly, "That's the cost of never facing your own truth." Natasha asked if he wanted to issue a statement. "No," James replied. "He's not the story anymore. The system is. Let Brennan fade." It was the last time Brennan's name would surface in any meaningful way. His downfall was complete. By autumn, the pressure was unbearable. Polls showed Harrison leading hypothetical Democratic primaries in several states. Donors quietly pledged millions if he entered the race. Editorials called him the conscience candidate. Yet James hesitated. Running for president meant leaving Virginia midterm. It meant exposing his family to relentless scrutiny. It meant risking everything he had built. One evening, Reverend Samuel Green visited again. "James," he said, "history rarely knocks twice. 4 years ago, you were handcuffed on a bench. Today, you are standing at the gates of history. The question is simple. Will you walk through?" James sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. That night, James stood alone on the balcony of the governor's mansion, looking out over Richmond's glowing skyline. He thought of Franklin Park, of Tyrone's trembling hands holding the phone, of Brennan's cuffs on his wrists, of Angela's tears, of his daughter's fiery determination. He thought of the chance. "Run, James, run," he whispered to himself, barely audible. Maybe it's time. The decision was not yet announced. But deep inside, James Harrison knew. The path ahead was no longer confined to Virginia. It was national. It was global. It was history. And the next step would decide not only his fate, but America's. The decision had been haunting him for months. He felt it in every headline, every chant, every late-night call from strategists who wanted him to seize history. The choice was no longer about ambition. It was about obligation. Governor James Harrison had become more than a man. He was a symbol born on a park bench in Richmond, Virginia. and symbols once created could not retreat back into silence. It was a crisp winter morning when James Harrison stepped onto the steps of the Virginia Capitol. The plaza was filled with thousands of supporters waving flags, opponents holding signs, and media from every network in America. The marble columns behind him glowed in the cold sunlight. Angela stood to his left. His daughter, now a practicing attorney, stood to his right. Natasha and Isaiah lingered just behind, faces solemn but steady. James gripped the podium. His voice was clear, steady, unflinching. 4 years ago, I sat on a park bench in Franklin Park. I was not a governor in that moment. I was a man, profiled, handcuffed, humiliated because of the color of my skin. That moment could have broken me, but instead, it changed me. And it changed Virginia. The crowd erupted in applause. Since then, we have shown the nation what accountability looks like. We have proven that justice and safety can walk hand in hand. But our work is not finished. It is not enough for one state to shine while the rest of the nation stumbles in darkness. He paused, letting the silence build. Then, so today, with humility, with resolve, and with faith in the people of this country, I announce my candidacy for President of the United States. The plaza shook with cheers. Supporters cried. Reporters shouted questions. Opponents booed and chanted. But the moment had arrived. James Harrison was no longer just a governor. He was a candidate for the highest office in the land. The campaign trail was brutal from the start. Attack ads flooded the airwaves. Old cases Harrison had argued as an attorney were twisted into sound bites. Harrison defended criminals. His reforms were recast as anti-police experiments. But Harrison leaned into the attacks. At rallies, he pointed to the footage of Franklin Park, to the testimony of families who had lost loved ones, to the statistics showing lower misconduct rates in Virginia. Accountability doesn't weaken us, he thundered at one rally. It makes us stronger, it makes us safer, and if we can do it in Virginia, we can do it across America. The crowds grew. College students chanted his name. Civil rights leaders endorsed him. Celebrities lent their voices. Harrison became not just a candidate, but a movement. The first Democratic primary debate was a turning point. 10 candidates crowded the stage. Harrison stood at the far end, the newcomer, the outsider. Midway through, a rival senator attacked him directly. Governor Harrison's ideas may sound good in speeches, but they're untested nationally. He's a first-term governor, not a commander-in-chief. James turned, his voice even but sharp. Senator, I don't need Washington experience to know what justice looks like. I know because I lived it in handcuffs, on a park bench, while serving as governor of my state. And I turned that humiliation into reform that's saving lives. If that's not leadership, tell me what is. The audience erupted. Headlines the next morning read, Harrison dominates debate. With his rise came darker tactics. Anonymous leaks claimed he had once associated with radical groups. A doctored photo circulated online, attempting to show him burning an American flag in college. Fact-checkers debunked it within hours. But the damage was done in certain circles. Angela bore the brunt. Tabloids camped outside their home. Old acquaintances sold stories. A gossip magazine ran a headline, Harrison's wife, silent or silenced. Late at night, she told James, I don't know how much longer I can take this. James held her close. I know. And if you want me to stop, I will. No office is worth losing us. Angela shook her head. No. You can't stop now. If you quit, they win, and I won't let them take that from you. Tyrone Davis, now a college graduate, re-entered the spotlight. At a Harrison rally in Atlanta, he took the stage unannounced. The crowd roared as he held up the same phone he had used 4 years earlier. This phone changed history, Tyrone shouted. But it wasn't the phone. It was truth, and Governor Harrison turned that truth into action. That's why I stand with him now, not as a witness, but as a believer. The endorsement went viral. James hugged him on stage, whispering, I told you history doesn't ask permission. Just weeks before the first primary vote, disaster struck. A Harrison campaign office in North Carolina was firebombed overnight. Thankfully, no one was killed, but the building was destroyed. Investigators called it politically motivated arson. James visited the site the next morning, standing before the charred remains. Reporters asked if he feared for his life. He answered simply, "Fear doesn't lead movements. Courage does. If they think fire will silence us, they don't know America." The footage became iconic. His calm against the backdrop of ashes told a story no slogan could. The primaries were grueling. Harrison lost Iowa narrowly, won New Hampshire in a stunning upset, and surged on Super Tuesday. By spring, he was the clear frontrunner. His message of accountability and justice resonated not just with black voters, but with young people, suburban moderates, and disillusioned independents. At a rally in Chicago, he declared, "We are building a coalition not of left or right, but of right and wrong, and together we will not just change a party, we will change a nation." By summer, James Harrison stood on stage at the Democratic National Convention accepting the nomination. The Franklin Park footage played on giant screens before his speech. Delegates wept. The hall thundered with applause. In the general election, he faced a conservative populist who painted him as the anti-police governor. The campaign was vicious, personal, and relentless. But Harrison stayed on message. This isn't about left or right. It's about justice or injustice, safety or fear, America or the betrayal of America's promise. The race was close. Every debate, every speech, every headline mattered. On election night, the nation held its breath. The early results were grim. His opponent led in key states. But as urban centers reported, the tide turned. Virginia, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan all flipped his way. At 2:13 a.m., the networks called it. James Harrison would be the next president of the United States. He stood before a jubilant crowd in Richmond, tears in his eyes. 4 years ago, I was handcuffed on a bench. Tonight, America has broken those handcuffs not just for me, but for all of us. This victory belongs to every voice that refused to be silent. Together, we will build a country where justice is not an ideal, but a reality. Weeks later, before the inauguration, James returned alone to Franklin Park. No cameras, no crowd, just him and the bench. He sat down, running his hand across the cold bronze plaque. For a moment he closed his eyes and let it all replay, the humiliation, the rage, the resolve. Then he whispered softly, "We did it." History would record his presidency in many ways, but for James Harrison, it always began and ended here, on a park bench in Richmond, where one man's dignity had been stolen and a nation's conscience awakened.